and Kurt Bardella is a Democratic strategist and NewsNation contributor. Great to have you both. Mick, 70% of voters say Biden is too old in a new New York Times poll that was out today, including a majority of Biden voters. And only 40% have the same concerns about Trump. It feels like the stakes and the risks are especially high for Biden tonight.
They are, Elizabeth. There's no question about it. But keep in mind, I'm one of the folks who believes that age really is just a number. It's not how old they are. It's how they act and how people perceive their abilities. We all know folks who are in their late 80s, even their early 90s, who are spry and go to work and exercise and those types of things. And we know folks in their early 70s who are simply not capable of doing much of what they could when they were younger. So it's not a number as much as it is as the ability. So I think what a lot of folks will be watching tonight is, how does Joe Biden act? Now, what is the number behind his age, but how does he look? How does he act? Is he energetic? Is he engaged like he was during the State of the Union? Or is he distracted like we've seen him at the G7 and the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion? I expect the former. I expect he's well rested and will be ready and be up tonight. But be a lot of folks looking at that, but has a lot more to do than just the number.
Yeah, but the concern either way, Kurt, is widespread. That same poll shows that what many consider to be Trump's Achilles heel, his temperament, is also a vulnerability for Biden. About equal numbers, 45, 47%, say that neither man has the personality and temperament to be the president. Does that surprise you?
No, I mean, these are two candidates, really, who are among the most well-known political figures of our time. There's not a whole lot of new ground to be gained here. And frankly, I think there's just a lot of fatigue, right? The American people, they know Donald Trump. They know Joe Biden. They're frankly not that particularly excited about either of them. They're tired of them, fatigued of them. And so, of course, you're not going to say, oh, yeah, we're really excited to have these two people on the stage tonight. There are doubts about both of them. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter, because no matter what, they're going to be their respective parties' nominees. They're both going to be on the ballot in November. So whether you think they're too old or not is kind of irrelevant. You're going to have to choose between one of these two people no matter what.
Yeah, well, the poll also shows, Mick, that most voters think that Trump will win tonight. Nearly half are anticipating that Biden will do poorly, citing his, quote, age and speaking style. Expectations are really low for him.
They are. And by the way, as a politician, that's a great place to be. It's always better to underpromise and overdeliver than do the opposite. So if the expectations are low for Joe Biden, that's a huge opportunity and an advantage for him. The folks who, 55% of the folks who think that Trump will win going in will be very surprised if Trump loses. But the folks who are expecting Joe Biden to do poorly can be very, very pleased on the other side if he does well. So no, that's smart of the Biden team. If they were able to, if they could draw it up, that's how they would draw it up. Keep in mind, there's a parallel there again for the State of the Union back in March. Yeah. Everybody expected Joe Biden, or a lot of folks expected Joe Biden to underperform, and he did very well.
These two men detest each other by all accounts. There will be 4 people in this debate hall, literally 4, Biden, Trump, and the 2 moderators. I got to imagine the tension's going to be pretty thick in there. Mick, what do you think?
I'll be watching. Yes, it's absolutely right. It'd be fascinating to hear what happens after the microphones turn off. I don't think we'll be able to hear those as folks watching on television, but the contestants, the candidates, will be able to hear it. So if Donald Trump's mic goes off and he keeps talking, we won't be able to hear that, but Joe Biden will. And it'd be fascinating to watch that dynamic, because you're right. They don't like each other. The moderators really don't like Donald Trump. We could talk about that another time if you like. But the conversation that takes place inside that room that we won't hear will be one of the untold stories of this. We won't know about that till after the night is over.
Kurt, what do you think?
Yeah, I kind of wonder. I know that when the debate starts, the mics are supposed to be off. There's not supposed to be all this crosstalk, but it almost feels like there's an inevitability that crosstalk, like Mick just talked about, that it will happen. And as that happens, and as that shapes the conversation and the debate and the tone and tenor of how they're interacting with one another, I do wonder if at some point CNN just might make the decision on the fly to say, you know what? It's impossible to mute this because it's actually a part of the conversation. Just leave them on and let them go at it.
Yeah, Mick, this debate is happening in Georgia, and there's so many plot lines that intersect there. Trump has been indicted in Georgia for trying to overthrow the 2020 election. The state went for Biden in 2020 by 11,779 votes, and I know that number because Trump was recorded asking for the Georgia Secretary of State to find that number of votes to flip. The state's popular Republican governor, Brian Kemp, did not vote for Trump in the primary, he says. And we've just had a highly publicized arrest of an illegal immigrant charged in the murder of a Georgia college student. So immigration, election interference, criminal charges, some notable GOP leaders uncomfortable with Trump, all center stage in Atlanta, in Georgia tonight.
I think it's fair to say, and I'd be curious to get Kurt's take on this as a Democrat strategist. I get the feeling, based upon the numbers I've seen, the people I've talked to in the delegation here in Washington, D.C., that Georgia is Trump's to lose, that this is not really a toss-up state, that North Carolina might actually be closer than Georgia at this point. Trump had a rough go of it 4 years ago. Of course, the Senate races went very badly for the Republicans, but you sort of get the sense that Georgia is coming back home. Georgia is a Republican state. They control the House, the Senate, the governor's office, etc. It should vote for Donald Trump, and I get the feeling that's where it is, unless something goes very, very badly. So I get the sense it's Trump's to lose here tonight, but I'd be curious to know what Kurt thinks.
Okay, very quickly, and Kurt, I promise I'll get your opinion on that in a second, but I did want to play a new Biden campaign ad that just came out today about Trump. It's called Unfit. It features members of Trump's own administration saying if people who know Donald Trump best can't trust him, neither can you. Take a look at a portion of it.
Dictator, tyrant,
dangerous,
threat to democracy. I cannot in good conscience endorse Donald Trump.
We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. We don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
We worked with him. We knew him. This man is unfit to be president. A second term would be more dangerous than a first.
Okay, Kurt, this ad features Trump's own Secretary of Defense, his own National Security Advisor, his own Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and his own Vice President, among others, all saying Trump is unfit to be president.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful persuasion tactic, because when you think about a lot of the audience that type of messaging would appeal to, it's an audience that generally probably hasn't seen a lot of coverage about those particular figures speaking out against their own former boss. We see a lot of times in places like Fox News and the right-wing media sphere, they don't really dedicate a lot of attention to those dissenting voices. So if you're the Biden campaign doing paid media advertising, I'm putting that type of stuff, not messaging from Democrats, not messaging for progressives, but Republican staffers, Republican people who knew Donald Trump, worked for Donald Trump. And I'm putting that everywhere, because that is the first time that audience who watches and consumes that type of media is probably seeing some of these comments.
Well, let's see.